Presumably you're asking, Colby, what does this scraggly old tree have to do with building an airplane, and why are you showing it to me? Well, turns out I like this old tree, as Osborns have for over 100 years, but that's a story for later. Looking closely though, there could be little airplane parts in this tree. And little airplane parts, that's what this video is about. We're going to take a look at how we did the cargo doors, the baggage bulkhead, carpet, installing the skylights, a little bit of wiring, and the stick grips. Stick around if you're interested in the details. Alright, so starting with the cargo doors. First, we installed the rear latching mechanism that came with the kit. This involved a couple of push rods which attached to a lever. Once in place, we drilled through the door formers where the push rods would penetrate. Next, we started attaching the cargo door skins to the frames. I started with the rear one and drilled a couple of holes to position the skin. Then I put the rear door in place and shot a laser in line with the stringers and marked the door skin. Next, I put a slight bend in the door skin on the reference line. After bent, we could go all the way around the frame drilling holes at a 3-inch spacing. Once the back door skin was drilled to the frame, we repeated the process with the front door skin. This one was a little too wide for my small brake, so I was back on my extension ladder shenanigans. After the skins for both the front and back doors were drilled to the frames, I marked a 1/4 inch overlap and cut the skins to size. Next, I positioned the window frames on the skin with some clamps. I worked to align the front and back window, and also tried to match the rear windows on the left side the best we could. Once I was happy with the alignment, I marked their position and then transferred the line to the inside of the door skins and drilled the frames to the door skins. Once the window frames were drilled to the skins, we marked their footprint, cut out the excess, and then installed the lock pin for the front cargo door frame. To keep the plexiglass held in, we cut and scabbed in a piece of aluminum at the front of both doors. Afterwards, we cut out the plexiglass with an angle grinder and cleaned up the edges with a utility knife and a file. To hold the plexiglass in place at the front where there's no frame on the inside, we made angle pieces to put in place on the inside. I think some builders drill through this angle piece, the plexiglass, and then through the outside piece, fastening it all together. But I decided to stick with the theme of making a channel for the plexiglass to float in and drilled it to the frame. The inside piece for the back D-shaped window needed notched out where the frame bends. I'll be using sheet metal screws to fasten these to the frame after painting. Next up was attaching gas struts to the cargo door to hold them open and keep them from overextending. I started by making some little brackets out of 1/8 inch aluminum. For the front door, I put the strut at the top. I played around with where to put the forward bracket where it would still allow the door to open at least 90 degrees, and then marked, drilled, and pop riveted it in place. Then I measured back on the door frame to position the second bracket the same distance as the gas strut measured when completely compressed. Admittedly, I completely forgot to do this step before covering, which resulted in doing it a little bit differently than I would have otherwise, but I think it'll work out just fine. We're using 15-inch 20-pound gas struts. If or when I replace them, I think I'll get ones that are a little lighter weight, as these seem stiffer than they need to be. Unlike all the other windows in the plane where we're using plexiglass or acrylic, we're using 1/8 inch lightly tinted Lexan or polycarbonate for the skylights. I first positioned the sheet of Lexan and marked where to cut lengthwise. Then I used an angle grinder, the same as we have the plexiglass, to cut it. Afterwards, I put it back in place so I could mark and cut it to width. Next, I put some adhesive-backed felt on the square tubing where the Lexan would rest. Afterwards, I cut a piece of 1/8 inch by 1/2 inch flat aluminum I picked up from a big box store to go on the outside. Then I lightly bent these pieces to match the curve of the skylight and clamped it in place. Once firmly clamped in place, I drilled holes spaced at 3 inches through the top strip, the Lexan, and all the way through the square tubing. The Lexan was then drilled out to 3/16 of an inch, and the holes through the flat aluminum and square tubing were drilled out for number 6 screws. Deburring these little holes with my basic tools was a little bit of a pain, but manageable. Then I purchased some 3/16 inch outside diameter rubber hose and cut little rubber bushings for all of the oversized holes we drilled in the Lexan. After cut, the pieces were pressed into each hole. The Lexan will shrink and swell with temperature fluctuations, and the little rubber pieces are to help cushion the holes and keep the Lexan from cracking around the screws. We'll wait until these pieces are painted, and there will be a thin aluminum fairing that goes under the aluminum flat piece and extends out to the wing. But I plan to tie it all together with number 6 screws and nylock nuts. This method will require 2 people for final installation, but seemed easier than fabricating a former with nut plates and attaching it to the outside of the square tubing like some builders do. To finish up, we put little strips of 3M strip caulk along the channels and pushed them into the channels the best we could to seal it up from rain. I found it worked best to use a piece of release paper or wax paper on top and then work it into the channels. The side windows were cut out of 0.08 inch plexiglass and then slid into place. Next, I made an angle piece that I drilled in place to seal off and hold the plexiglass at the front of the larger window. I haven't decided if I should make a similar joggle piece to go at the front of the small D-shaped window or just seal the inside of it. So I haven't done anything there, but if you have any good ideas, we'd love to hear them. Next up was the baggage bulkhead. I started by gluing 2 pieces of leftover Oratex together with their hot melt glue. Then I marked where to cut with a pattern we made from cardboard and cut it to size. Next, I drilled and fastened snaps to the tabs with pop ribbons, followed by setting the opposite side of the snaps to the Oratex piece. It looks pretty terrible because I did a poor job gluing the 2 pieces of Oratex together. So I bailed on the Oratex one and made one out of canvas like the designer recommends. Next up was installing carpet on the floor. We used some lightweight marine carpet. The downside with the pieces I had was I had to piece them together a bit more than desired and have a couple of extra seams. As easy as it is to install, I expect we'll replace the carpet as it gets worn or really dirty, so it's probably kind of a short-term issue. The last thing we did was a little wiring. First was running a cable to provide the ELT with navigation data. The ELT we're using came with a 4-pin connector. There are 3 wires that need to run to the panel, and a 4th wire is needed just for verification testing. I soldered these wires and wrote down the colors in the owner's manual for future reference. Then, per the instructions, I sealed the solder joint and jack with RTV sealant and finished up the connector. The other thing we wired were the push-to-talk buttons on the control sticks. First, we drilled holes at the back of the stick where we wanted the wires to exit. Then we used the old tie some cotton on a string and suck it through the tube with a shop vac fishing method. This made it quick and easy to pull the wires through the pretty tight angles in the control sticks that we have. Afterwards, I pressed a rubber grommet in place to protect the wire from rubbing where it penetrates the stick. To attach the push-to-talk switches, I removed the outer insulation and shield, and then stripped the individual wires. Next, I pre-tinned both wires and the lugs on the switch. Once everything was pre-tinned and some heat shrink was slid on, I soldered both wires to the lugs. Then I finished up with some heat shrink. Afterwards, I installed the push-to-talk button in the stick grips, applied some silicone sealant to the control sticks, and slid the grip into place. To keep the wire secured on the back side of the control stick assembly, I used self-adhesive cable tie mounts. This location seemed to put the least amount of stress on the wire throughout the control stick range of motion. Alright, that's pretty much all we got for this one, except for the story of why the Osborns have liked this scraggly old tree for over 100 years. Well, long story short, 125 years ago, Osborns moved from Virginia to homestead in Nebraska. The story I've been told is my great-grandmother really missed the trees in Virginia when moving to the Nebraska sandhills, which at the time were completely barren of trees. I'm not exactly sure how this tree ended up here, but we suspect it was transplanted from the closest river for her. I'm told she wanted to be able to look out and see just one tree. So this tree became very special to her and happens to be one of those sentimental things that lived on for many generations. So I thought, why not rob a dead branch and incorporate a small piece into the ranch art? We'll see you guys in the next one.